Ever wonder how, these really small countries can be such powerhouses of innovation, especially when it comes to creating a sustainable future for all of us?
Yeah, it's a great question. It really makes you think.
It does, and that's what this deep dive is all about. We're going to unpack some fascinating answers.
Exactly. We're looking at a really insightful study today. The title is a bit of a mouthful: Variations in Innovation Strategies for Sustainable Development. But it's by Dome, Sikek, and Matus, published in Research Policy.
Got it. Research policy.
hmm
And they zero in on 10 smaller OECD countries, right? Like Austria, Denmark, Finland.
Ireland, Israel, New Zealand, Norway, Slovakia, Sweden, and Switzerland. So all with populations roughly between, say, 4 and 10 million.
And what's so interesting is that these places, they really punch above their weight, don't they? In
Yeah.
innovation and sustainability.
They do. And maybe because they have limited resources, smaller home markets, they're forced to be incredibly smart, very strategic with their policies.
Makes sense.
So their successes and, frankly, where they still have challenges, offer some really valuable lessons for, well, for anyone thinking about how to drive meaningful change.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our mission today, for you listening, is really to distill the core insights from this study. We want to pull out some surprising facts, maybe some understandable models of innovation that you can apply.
Yeah, hopefully giving you some food for thought, whether you're involved in policy, running a business, or even just thinking about your own choices.
And the scope here was pretty big, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. To give you a sense, the researchers looked at over 1,700 different government actions, policy interventions, they call them,
Wow, 1,700.
between 2008 and 2020. And they looked across 5 really key sectors:
Yeah.
agriculture, water, health, energy, and manufacturing. So pretty comprehensive.
Okay. So after sifting through all that data, what were the big patterns? How are these small giants actually, making sustainable innovation happen?
Well, what's truly fascinating is that they didn't all do it the same way. The study identified 3 quite distinct approaches, 3 different philosophies, really, guiding their sustainable innovation policies.
3 distinct models.
Uh,
Okay, let's dig into the first one.
okay, the first one they called the Nordic model. And you see this strongly in Denmark, Sweden, and Finland. The key thing here is a very strategic, very active role for the government. It's quite state-led.
State-led. So the government isn't just like setting rules, it's actually getting involved. How does that look?
Well, think substantial public money going into R&D, but
Mhm.
specifically focused on applied research, strategic research, solving concrete problems.
Okay.
They also actively work to create markets for sustainable technologies. You see lots of government-funded pilot projects, strong public-private partnerships,
Ah, interesting.
and a real emphasis on working together internationally, especially, among the Nordic countries themselves. The underlying idea seems to be that the government isn't just a referee, it's a strategic investor, even a co-creator of these new sustainable markets.
So if you had to use an analogy, it's like the government is conducting an orchestra, pointing the way, funding the instruments for sustainability.
That's a great way to put it, actually. Yeah, the government is directing things, strategically guiding innovation towards societal and environmental goals.
Okay, that's the Nordic model, strategic, government-led. What's the second approach they found?
The second is what they termed the entrepreneurial model. And Israel and New Zealand are the main examples here. This is quite different, much more bottom up.
Bottom up, so less about the government setting the grand plan.
Exactly. Here, the government focuses more on giving direct financial tools and support right to the companies, to the entrepreneurs themselves who are working on sustainable stuff.
Okay, like what sort of tools?
Think government-backed venture capital, maybe setting up startup incubators or accelerators specifically focused on green tech or sustainable business models.
Got it.
The emphasis is more on building flexible support systems that can adapt, rather than having rigid long-term plans dictated from the top.
Right.
The core belief, it seems, is trusting that a dynamic private sector, if you give it the right push, the right tools, is best placed to find and deliver innovative solutions.
So the government's role is kind of like providing the training wheels and maybe the initial boost for these innovators.
Precisely. It's about using limited state resources smartly to just catalyze what's already happening in the entrepreneurial world.
All right, so we have the top-down Nordic way and this bottom-up entrepreneurial model. What's the third style?
The third one is called the enabling environment model, and Switzerland is the prime example here. This approach is, again, different. It's less about directly steering innovation or funding specific companies,
Right.
and more about creating the overall conditions where sustainable innovation can just sort of emerge and thrive naturally.
So not playing the game directly, but making sure the playing field itself is really fertile. How do they do that? What policies?
Well, you see policies that support industry clusters, getting related businesses and research groups physically or virtually
Kind of
together.
like Silicon Valley, but for sustainability, maybe.
Kinda, yeah. Fostering strong networks, collaborations, investing in things like science parks, and just the general knowledge infrastructure of the country.
I see.
The idea is if you have the right institutions, a supportive regulatory environment, good infrastructure for research and collaboration, then sustainable innovation will likely just happen more organically.
Okay, so following our analogies, Nordic is the conductor, entrepreneurial is the toolkit provider, and this enabling environment is like the gardener, tending the soil, making sure the climate's right.
That's a spot-on analogy, yes. The philosophy is innovation as a natural result of a healthy system with the right foundations.
These are three really different ways to tackle the same huge challenge. But the study didn't just find successes, right? It also pointed out some common problems,
Yep.
some areas where things aren't working so well.
That's a really important point, yes. While these countries are doing a lot right, the research definitely highlighted three critical weaknesses or blind spots that seem to be holding back even faster progress.
Okay, let's dig into those weaknesses. What's the first big one?
The first is something they called strategy without action. Basically, they found that many of these countries have developed really quite impressive national sustainability strategies, big visions for the future.
Right, we hear about those kinds of plans a lot.
Exactly. But then a significant number of them seem to lack the concrete, specific implementation plans and the policy tools needed to actually make those visions happen.
So lots of ambition on paper,
Yeah.
but maybe not enough follow through on the ground.
That's the idea. The study did mention Denmark and Finland as maybe being a bit better at connecting strategy to specific actions and tools.
Okay.
But the general point is a plan is only as good as its execution, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Makes total sense. What was the second big gap they found?
The second major gap is about supporting the journey from the initial idea or research to large-scale production and getting it into the market. They call this the production gap.
The valley of death for innovation. We hear that term a lot.
Exactly. And it applies here too. The study found there's often limited public investment in things like manufacturing support or infrastructure that's specifically geared towards sustainable production methods.
Right.
Or even just programs to help firms scale up their sustainable innovations once they've proven the concept.
So a brilliant idea might get initial research funding, but then it gets stuck because there's no support to actually build it or make it widely available.
That's the risk. You can have a great lab result, but without help crossing that valley, building factories, refining processes for mass production, it might just fizzle out. It doesn't achieve its potential impact.
So the focus is maybe too much on the spark, the R&D, and not enough on the really crucial middle steps of actually making things and getting them out there.
It seems that way in many cases, that support for production and scaling is often missing or under-resourced.
Okay, and what was the third key weakness the study identified?
The third one is about uneven support across different sectors. They termed it beyond energy, uneven sectoral support.
Okay, what does that mean?
Basically, the research showed that the energy sector tends to get a huge amount, maybe a disproportionate amount, of policy attention and funding when it comes to sustainable innovation, especially around adopting and spreading new technologies.
That's interesting. We do hear a lot about renewables, electric vehicles.
Exactly. But the study points out that other critical sectors like agriculture, health, water management, even manufacturing itself, often don't get the same level of targeted support for sustainable innovation.
So the focus is lopsided towards energy.
It often seems to be, and the consequence is that this imbalance could actually hinder our overall progress on sustainability goals. Because, a truly sustainable future needs innovation everywhere.
Right, you can't just fix energy and ignore how we grow food, manage water, or make goods sustainably. It all has to connect.
Precisely. It really highlights the need for a more holistic, more comprehensive approach that looks across all the key sectors.
Okay, so we've got the three models, Nordic, entrepreneurial enabling environment, and these three big gaps, strategy versus action, the production gap, and the uneven focus on energy. So what are the main lessons here for us, for you listening?
Well, if you happen to be involved in policy, at any level really, this study gives you a lot to think about. First, Which of these models, the state-led, the bottom-up, or the ecosystem approach, might fit best with your own national or regional strengths?
Good question.
And maybe more critically, where are your blind spots? Do you have great strategies but maybe lack the tools for implementation? Is there a production gap stopping good ideas from scaling up?
Hmm.
And are you looking broadly enough? Are you supporting innovation across all the key sectors needed for sustainability, not just, say, energy? Are you building the partnerships needed, making strategies actually actionable?
And what about for people in business? Entrepreneurs, people in larger firms?
Yeah, for you, it's maybe worth thinking about. Where does your country or region seem to fit in these models? Is there strong government backing for sustainable growth in your field, or is it more about navigating things yourself?
Right, understanding the landscape.
Exactly. Knowing the prevailing approach can help you find opportunities, maybe tap into existing support, or even, advocate for the kinds of changes or support systems that would help you innovate more sustainably.
And for anyone just interested in this stuff, the analysts, the academics listening.
I think the big takeaway is that nuance really matters here. There isn't a simple best practice that works everywhere. Innovation policies are super context dependent.
Depends on history, politics.
Exactly. History, political systems, existing institutions, they all shape what's possible and what's likely to be effective. What works in, say, Denmark might not translate directly to New Zealand and certainly not easily to a much larger country.
So wrapping this up then, this deep dive into this study really gives us a valuable framework, doesn't it?
Yeah.
For understanding the different ways these small, successful nations are approaching sustainable innovation.
Definitely. And the core message, I think, for you listening is that there's no single right way. But by looking at these different models, and crucially, by being aware of those common pitfalls, the strategy action gap, the production challenge, the need for broad sectoral support,
Right.
we can all learn from that. We can work towards building more effective strategies and policies, whatever our context or scale.
So here's a final thought for you to take away. Think about your own context. Maybe it's your job, your community, even just your personal life. What's the strategy for becoming more sustainable there? How is it actually being put into action? And are there any hidden production gaps or maybe areas getting less attention than they should that might be holding back progress towards that sustainable future you envision?
Yeah, lots to think about. Let's keep exploring these ideas. What parts of innovation and sustainability are you most curious about? What other surprising lessons can we uncover?